The streetlight flickered as rain whispered against cracked asphalt. Ethan knelt beside a fallen motorbike, sleeves soaked, fingers numb, tightening a bolt with a wrench he'd found in his trunk. A woman stood nearby, hugging her coat, eyes rimmed red. Not from the cold alone. Somewhere down the block, a siren wailed and faded. Ethan didn't ask her name. He didn't ask why she was crying. He just fixed what was broken because that's what he did when the world felt heavy. He made small things right again. Before we go any further, I wonder where you're listening from tonight. Stories like this travel farther than we ever expect, crossing streets and cities, hearts and histories. Leave your city below. Let's remind ourselves how connected kindness still makes us. Ethan was 36, a single dad with tired eyes and a calm voice that hid years of quiet struggle. He worked days at a public school as a maintenance supervisor and nights driving delivery routes to cover what his paycheck couldn't. His daughter, Lily, was 8, freckled, curious, and missing her mother in a way she never quite said out loud. When the bike sputtered earlier that evening, Ethan had been on his way home, thinking about leftover pasta and a science project due tomorrow. The woman, Grace, had waved him down with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she'd said quickly, as if apologizing for existing. It won't start. I tried everything." Ethan crouched, inspecting the chain. "You're okay," he said, gentle. "Looks like the tension slipped. Happens." Grace watched him work, rain beating on his jacket. She noticed the way he focused, like the rest of the world softened around the problem in front of him. "You don't have to," she said. He shrugged. "I've got time." That was the first kindness. Small, ordinary, unremarkable, except it landed on Grace's heart like a held breath finally released. If you were standing there in that moment, soaked and late and tired, what would you have done? Would you have stopped or driven on? Be honest, share your answer below. And if this moment stirred something quiet inside you, tap like to say compassion still counts. Grace hadn't planned to be on that street. She'd driven for hours, circling memories she didn't want to visit. Her life, from the outside, was immaculate. Penthouse views, private meetings, numbers that never stopped growing. Inside, it was hollow. She'd spent years building a company that changed lives, yet somehow lost her own along the way. Love had become a transaction. Attention, a performance. "Try it now," Ethan said, stepping back. The engine turned. A low, steady hum. Grace laughed, a soft, surprised sound that escaped before she could stop it. "It works." "Good," he said, packing his tools. "You'll want to get that chain looked at soon." She hesitated. Can I pay you?" Ethan shook his head. "Nah, just get home safe." He waved once and walked to his car, unaware of the way Grace watched him leave, as if she'd just glimpsed a version of life she'd forgotten was possible. Over the next weeks, they crossed paths again, once at a coffee shop near the school, another time outside a bookstore. Each meeting felt accidental, yet carried a strange gravity. They talked about small things at first. Weather, coffee, the way cities make you feel lonely even when you're surrounded. Grace never mentioned her wealth. Ethan never asked what she did for work. It was easier that way. One afternoon, Grace sat on a low wall while Ethan waited for Lily after school. Children spilled out laughing, backpacks bouncing. Lily ran to him, arms wide. "Dad." Grace smiled, something aching in her chest. "She's wonderful," she said. "She's my best thing," Ethan replied. "Have you ever been helped by someone when you felt completely alone? Type yes, and if you can, share their name. Gratitude has a way of finding its way back." Grace began volunteering at the school, helping with reading programs. She said it helped her stay grounded. Ethan noticed how she really listened to the kids. How she laughed without guarding herself. He felt something warm and dangerous growing between them. But life has a way of testing gentle things. One evening, Ethan was called into the principal's office. Budget cuts. Layoffs. His position was being eliminated. He nodded, thanked them, walked out steady. In the parking lot, he sat in his car and let the silence press in. Grace found him there by chance. One look at his face, and she knew. He didn't want to talk. She didn't push. She just sat beside him, sharing the quiet. Sometimes, she said softly, everything changes at once. He exhaled. Yeah. That night, Ethan tucked Lily in, kissed her forehead, and stared at the ceiling long after the house went dark. He didn't know how he'd keep things afloat. He didn't know how to ask for help. And across the city, Grace stood alone in a glass-walled office, staring at her reflection, wondering how to tell the truth she'd been hiding, because the closer she grew to Ethan, the heavier that secret became. Grace didn't sleep that night. The city glowed beneath her apartment windows, all glass and light and distance, but none of it reached her. She kept seeing Ethan's face in the parking lot, how he tried to hold himself together, how his shoulders had sagged just a little when he thought no one was looking. Loss recognized loss. She knew that weight too well. The next morning, she showed up at the school early, coffee in hand, pretending she was there to help shelve books. In truth, she was waiting. When Ethan arrived, he looked surprised and then embarrassed, as if she'd caught him in something private. You didn't have to come, he said. I wanted to, she replied simply. They worked side by side in the library, the smell of old paper and pencil shavings hanging in the air. Ethan didn't mention the layoff. Grace didn't ask, but silence has a way of speaking anyway. My dad used to fix things, Grace said suddenly, reshelving a worn paperback. Cars. Radios. Anything broken. Ethan glanced at her. Yeah. He said it helped him feel useful when the world didn't make sense. She paused. I think that's why last night hit me so hard. Ethan nodded once. Fixing things that's easier than fixing life. As the days passed, the truth of Ethan's situation pressed closer. He sold his old guitar, picked up extra night shifts, skipped meals so Lily wouldn't notice the difference. Grace saw it all in fragments, his tired eyes, the way he checked his phone constantly, calculating hours and miles. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Right, yes, and tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think. Grace wanted to help, really help. But the way she could, the way she always had, felt wrong here. Money would shatter what they'd built. It would turn kindness into charity, connection into obligation. And yet, watching Ethan struggle without stepping in felt unbearable. The reveal came on a gray afternoon when Lily fell sick at school. High fever, short breaths. Ethan raced her to the hospital, heart pounding louder than the rain. Grace arrived moments later, breathless, hair damp, eyes wide with fear that surprised even her. They waited together under harsh lights. Lily slept fitfully, small chest rising and falling. A doctor explained the tests, the observation, the cost. Ethan nodded, jaw tight. I've got it, he said, though his voice wavered. Grace stepped away to make a call. Her tone shifted, calm, precise, authoritative. When she returned, the admissions nurse smiled politely, deferential. It's taken care of, the nurse said to Ethan. All of it. Ethan stared. What do you mean, taken care of? Grace's eyes met his. The truth landed between them, heavy and unavoidable. She told him then about the company, the billions, the life she kept hidden because she wanted something real. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. You should have told me, Ethan said quietly. I wanted you to know me first, she replied, voice trembling. Not my money. He looked at Lily, then back at Grace. Hurt flickered, pride, fear, something fragile. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Neither did she. In the days after Lily recovered, distance crept in. Ethan thanked Grace, politely but stiffly. Calls went unanswered. Grace returned to her glass tower, surrounded by people who needed things from her, yet feeling more alone than ever. She replayed that night on the street. The rain, the motorbike, the man who fixed what was broken without asking for anything back. She realized then that love, like trust, can't be bought. It has to be chosen, earned, protected. So she made a decision, not as a billionaire, not as a savior, but as a woman willing to risk rejection for something true. Grace wrote Ethan a letter. No numbers, no offers, just honesty. She apologized for the secrecy, for the fear it caused. She told him she didn't want to fix his life, only to walk beside him, if he'd let her. Ethan read it at the kitchen table while Lily colored nearby. The house was quiet, the future uncertain. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his pocket, and stared out the window, wondering if opening his heart again would save him, or break him even more. Ethan didn't answer the letter right away. Days passed. Then a week. The envelope stayed folded in his jacket pocket, edges softening from being touched and retouched. At night, after Lily fell asleep, he'd take it out and read it again. Not for the words, but for the feeling behind them. There was no pity in Grace's handwriting. No solutions neatly wrapped with money. Just truth. Fear. Hope. And that scared him more than anything. He'd spent years building walls, not out of bitterness, but survival. After Lily's mother left, promises had felt dangerous. Depending on anyone felt like gambling with his daughter's heart. Grace hadn't meant to hurt him, he knew that. But intention didn't erase impact. Meanwhile, Grace forced herself not to chase him. Not with calls. Not with appearances that might feel like pressure. It went against every instinct she had. In business, silence meant weakness. Here, silence meant respect. She poured herself into work again, but it felt hollow. Meetings blurred. Applause rang empty. At night, she found herself driving, past the school, past the coffee shop, never stopping, just looking. One afternoon, Ethan finally showed up at the community center where Grace volunteered on weekends. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her help a group of kids with a mural. Paint streaked her hands. She laughed easily, freely. Not the woman from magazine covers. Just Grace. She noticed him and froze. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Hey," she replied carefully. They stepped outside. Autumn air. Leaves scraping along the sidewalk. "I read your letter," Ethan said. Grace nodded. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." He exhaled slowly. "That's the problem." He told her about the nights he'd stayed awake doing math he didn't want Lily to see. About how being a father meant choosing stability over desire every single day. "I don't want my kid thinking love comes with secrets," he said. "Or that help always has strings." Grace listened, eyes wet but steady. "I never wanted to be your solution," she said softly. "I just wanted to be with you." That word, with, hung there. Ethan didn't answer right away. But something shifted. Not fixed. Not healed. Just opened. They began again slowly. Walks. Coffee. Conversations that didn't dodge the hard parts. Grace learned when to step back. Ethan learned when to let someone stay. Lily watched it all with quiet intelligence, noticing how Grace never tried to impress, only to be present. One evening, Lily asked, "Are you rich?" Grace laughed, startled. Ethan nearly choked on his drink. "I guess I am," Grace said gently. Lily nodded, considering. "That's okay, as long as you're nice." Grace's eyes filled. "I can do nice," she whispered. "Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you did recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight." Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the streets. Bills still came. Work was still uncertain. But something warmer settled into Ethan's life. Grace never offered money outright. Instead, she offered time. Helped Lily with homework. Cooked meals. Sat with Ethan in silence when the weight pressed in. Eventually, Ethan found steady work again, not because of Grace's influence, but because he kept going. When he told her the news, pride shone in his eyes. "I did it," he said. She smiled. "I never doubted you." The real test came when the world found out. A photo surfaced online, Grace and Ethan, laughing outside the school. Headlines followed. Speculation. Comments. Strangers dissecting his life, questioning his motives, calling him lucky, calling him names. Ethan shut his phone off. Old fears rushed back. Grace showed up that night, standing in the doorway, unsure if she was welcome. "I can disappear if you want," she said quietly. "I won't fight you on that." Ethan looked at her, really looked not at the billionaire, not at the storm around them, but at the woman who'd stood in the rain, who'd sat beside him in silence, who'd learned how to love without fixing. "No," he said. "Stay." And in that moment, he chose her, not because of what she had, but because of who she was becoming beside him. But love, once chosen, still demands courage. And soon, Ethan would be forced to confront a decision that would test not just his pride, but his ability to forgive what he never expected to lose again. The noise didn't fade overnight. If anything, it grew louder. Ethan felt it the next morning at the grocery store. Two people whispering too loudly by the cereal aisle. He felt it when Lily's teacher hesitated before smiling, when a stranger held a phone just a little too high. The world had decided who he was now, and none of them had asked him. At home, Lily sensed the shift. Children always do. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked one evening, sitting cross-legged on the couch. Ethan's chest tightened. He knelt in front of her, hands warm on her small shoulders.
"No, sweetheart.
Never. Grown-ups just forget how to mind their business sometimes." Grace overheard from the kitchen. She stood still, gripping the counter, guilt creeping in like a slow ache. This was what she'd feared. Her world colliding with his, leaving marks he never asked for. That night, she made a choice that hurt more than writing any check ever had. She pulled back, not disappearing, not punishing, just stepping out of the center of his life. Fewer nights over, more space, more quiet. She told herself it was love, not fear, but it was both. Ethan noticed. "You don't have to protect me from yourself," he said one evening, frustration cracking through his calm. Grace swallowed. "I don't know how not to." Silence followed, the kind that doesn't scream but cuts. Weeks passed like that. Careful, fragile. And then came the call. It was Lily's school. There had been an incident, another parent, a comment, a confrontation that turned sharp and ugly. Lily hadn't been hurt, but she'd heard enough to understand she was different now.
Exposed.
Ethan arrived to find her sitting in the office, knees pulled to her chest, eyes glassy. "They said you were using her," Lily whispered as soon as she saw him. "They said you only loved her because she's rich." Something in Ethan snapped, not loudly, but deeply. At home that night, after Lily slept, Ethan paced the kitchen, hands shaking. Grace stood near the doorway, tears streaking her face. "This isn't what I wanted," she said. "I swear." "I know," Ethan replied, then quieter. But knowing doesn't make it stop hurting. He needed space. Not forever. Just enough to think. To protect his daughter. To remember who he was before the world named him something else. Grace nodded, though it felt like agreeing to disappear. She left without arguing, without asking him to stay. For the first time in her life, she let herself lose control. Days later, a package arrived at Ethan's door. No return address. Inside was a notebook. On the first page, Grace had written, "For Lily, stories of people who stayed kind when life got loud." Ethan sat at the table and cried, quietly, so his daughter wouldn't hear. If that moment touched you in a place you didn't expect, leave a red heart. Sometimes a single symbol carries the weight of feelings we can't put into words. Time did its slow work. The media moved on. Whispers softened. Lily laughed again. Ethan found his footing, steady, proud, alone. And Grace watched from a distance, learning the hardest lesson of her life, that loving someone sometimes means stepping back and trusting that what you gave was enough. But life wasn't done testing them. One evening, months later, Ethan's phone rang. An unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it. Almost. "Mr. Carter?" a man's voice said. "This is St. Vincent's Hospital. It's about Grace." The room tilted. She collapsed during a board meeting. The voice continued. "Stress-induced. We thought you should know. She listed you as an emergency contact." Ethan didn't think. He grabbed his keys, heart pounding, fear rushing in faster than pride ever could. In the hospital corridor, under the same harsh lights where Lily once slept, Ethan saw Grace. Pale, small, human in a way the world never allowed her to be. She opened her eyes slowly. "You came," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "Of course I did." And standing there, faced with the fragility of the woman he loved, Ethan would soon have to answer a question deeper than anger, deeper than pride. Could he forgive the pain that came with loving her, or would fear cost them the future they were still fighting for? The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm plastic, a soundless hum filling the spaces between breaths. Ethan sat beside Grace's bed, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. Machines blinked softly, indifferent to the storm raging inside him. Grace looked smaller here. Stripped of titles. Stripped of armor. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, voice thin. Ethan stared at the floor. "You listed me as your emergency contact." She managed a weak smile. "Because you're the one who feels like home." That word again. He looked at her then, really looked. The exhaustion etched into her face. The fear she hadn't learned how to hide. For the first time, he saw the cost of her strength. How long she'd been carrying everything alone. "They said stress," he said. She nodded. "Turns out you can't outrun your own heart forever." Silence settled, heavy but honest. "I kept thinking," Grace continued slowly, "if I stepped back far enough, I wouldn't hurt you anymore. I thought loving you quietly would be safer." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't get to decide that alone." "I know." Her eyes filled. "And I'm sorry." Those words, simple, unguarded, hit harder than any headline ever had. Ethan leaned back in his chair, memories flooding in. Lily's face in the school office. The whispers. The anger he'd swallowed whole. He'd blamed Grace for the chaos, but deep down, he knew it wasn't her wealth that hurt. It was his fear of losing control. Fear of failing his daughter. Fear of loving someone who lived in a world he couldn't protect them from. "I've been angry," he admitted. "Not because you're rich, but because I felt small, replaceable." Grace shook her head weakly. "You were never small to me. You were the only thing that felt real." Outside the room, a nurse passed by, footsteps echoing down the corridor. Time kept moving whether they were ready or not. "Be honest. Could you forgive after what happened?" Type forgive if you could, or never if it would break you too deeply. Ethan stood and walked to the window, city lights glowing beyond the glass. He thought of Lily asleep at home, clutching the notebook Grace had sent. Stories of kindness. Proof that love didn't vanish just because it got complicated. "I don't know how to do this perfectly," he said, voice low. "I don't know how to protect Lily from the world you live in." Grace's voice trembled. "I don't need perfect. I just need a chance to show up.
Fully."
Honestly." He turned back to her. The anger hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, reshaped into something closer to understanding. "I can't promise I won't get scared again," Ethan said. She met his eyes. "I can't promise I won't mess up." A pause. Then, "But maybe," he continued, "we stop running when it gets hard." Grace reached for his hand. This time he didn't pull away. Recovery took weeks. Grace slowed down, really slowed down. She delegated. She stepped out of rooms that demanded too much. She learned how to rest without guilt. Ethan visited often, sometimes with Lily, sometimes alone. They talked about boundaries, about noise, about choosing each other in a world that liked to interfere. When Grace was discharged, she didn't return to her penthouse. She rented a modest place near Ethan's neighborhood. Not as a statement, but as a promise. People noticed, commented, speculated again. But it didn't land the same way. Because this time, Ethan wasn't hiding. He wasn't defensive. He was standing. One evening, months later, Ethan stood on the same street where it all began. The same flickering streetlight. The same stretch of cracked asphalt. Grace stood beside him, hands in her pockets. "You ever think about that night?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "I almost didn't stop." She smiled softly. "I'm glad you did." Lily ran ahead, laughing, chasing her shadow under the streetlight. Grace watched her, heart full in a way no achievement had ever given her. "I want to earn this," Grace said quietly. "Not with money. with time, with showing up. Ethan nodded. That's all I ever wanted. And as the night settled around them, the city humming softly, they stood. Not as a billionaire and a single dad, not as a scandal or a story, but as two people who'd chosen forgiveness over fear. What came next wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. And sometimes, that's the bravest ending a love story can ask for. Spring arrived quietly, the way healing often does. No grand announcement, no sudden relief, just small changes that added up to something steady. Trees along Ethan's street began to bud again. Windows stayed open longer. Laughter lingered instead of rushing away. Grace learned the rhythm of an ordinary life. Morning coffee at the same corner cafe. Grocery lists taped to the fridge. Waiting in the car during Lily's piano lessons, listening to wrong notes turn slowly into right ones. For the first time, her days weren't ruled by urgency. They were shaped by presence. Ethan watched her closely, not out of doubt, but care. He noticed how she asked before stepping in. How she listened when Lily talked about school dramas that felt enormous at 8 years old. How she never tried to buy affection, only earned trust. One afternoon, Lily brought home a permission slip for a school field trip. The cost was small, but Ethan hesitated, doing the familiar mental math. Grace saw it, said nothing. Later that evening, Lily skipped into the kitchen holding a handwritten coupon. "It's okay, Dad," she said proudly. "I used my birthday money." Ethan blinked. Grace looked away, giving him space to swallow the lump in his throat. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Ethan sat beside Grace on the couch. "You did that," he said quietly. She nodded. She wanted to help. "I just let her." He reached for her hand, squeezing it once. Gratitude passed between them without words. They were building something fragile and strong at the same time. But the world, persistent as ever, tested them again. Grace was invited to speak at a major conference, one she couldn't decline without consequences. Cameras.
Press.
Questions that would inevitably turn personal. She dreaded it, not for herself, but for what it might stir up again. "I don't want to drag you back into that," she told Ethan. He considered it, then said, "I don't want to hide anymore." The day of the conference, Grace stood on stage beneath bright lights, her voice steady as she spoke about leadership, responsibility, and redefining success. Near the end, a reporter asked the question everyone expected. "How has your personal life changed your perspective?" Grace paused, looked out at the audience. "It taught me that the most valuable things in life don't come with headlines," she said. They come quietly, through kindness, patience, and the people who choose to stay. No names, no spectacle. At home, Ethan watched the broadcast with Lily curled beside him. "That's Grace," Lily said proudly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "That's her." When Grace returned, nervous energy still buzzing under her skin, Ethan met her at the door. No words, just a hug that said, "I'm still here. If you believe love still wins, comment amen." Let's fill this space with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. Summer followed, warm and forgiving. Grace helped Lily learn to ride a bike, running behind her, laughing as Lily wobbled, then soared forward on her own. Ethan watched from the sidewalk, heart full in a way that surprised him. "You let go," Lily yelled. Grace stood breathless, smiling through tears. "You were ready." Ethan realized then that this was what trust looked like. Not holding tighter, but knowing when to release. The final step came quietly. One evening, Grace sat with Ethan at the kitchen table, hands folded. "I want to be clear," she said. "I'm not here to change your life. I just want to be part of it if that still feels right." Ethan looked around the room, the scuffed table, Lily's drawings on the fridge, the soft hum of a home rebuilt piece by piece. "It does," he said. "It really does." They didn't rush the future. They didn't promise more than they could give. They chose something better than certainty. They chose each other again and again. And as the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the window, Ethan understood something he'd never known before. Love didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with consistency, with forgiveness, with staying. And in that quiet realization, a new chapter began, one that would soon bring them face to face with a choice that carried not fear this time, but hope. The offer came on an ordinary Tuesday. Grace was folding laundry when her phone rang, an international number she hadn't seen in months. She answered out of habit, expecting logistics. What she heard instead shifted the ground beneath her feet. A global foundation wanted her to lead a long-term humanitarian expansion overseas. 3 years. Massive impact. Everything she'd once worked toward. Everything she'd believed defined purpose. She sat on the edge of the bed long after the call ended, phone resting in her palm like it weighed too much. That evening, she told Ethan the truth without softening it. "They want me in Europe," she said. "It's important work." Ethan listened, face unreadable. Lily colored at the table nearby, humming softly. "How long?" he asked. "Years." Silence stretched. Later, after Lily went to sleep, Ethan stood alone in the backyard, night air cool against his skin. He'd known this moment would come one day, the point where love and life pulled in different directions. Old instincts whispered, "Let her go first, before it hurts worse." Grace joined him, careful not to touch. "I won't go if it costs us," she said quietly. "I won't choose ambition over family again." That word landed heavier than any promise. Ethan turned to her. "I won't be the reason you shrink your life," he said. "I know what it's like to look back and wonder who you could have been. But I also won't pretend this is easy," he continued. "Lily's world matters. Stability matters." They stood there, both telling the truth, neither demanding sacrifice. The next day, Ethan spoke with Lily. "Grace might have to go away for a while," he said gently. "Not because she wants to leave us, but because sometimes people are called to help others." Lily was quiet. Then she said, "Can she still come back?" Ethan smiled softly. "Yes." "Then it's okay," Lily said, "because people who love you come back." Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. That night, he called Grace into the living room. Lily sat between them, holding both their hands. "We talked," Ethan said. "All of us." Grace's breath caught. "I can't move Lily," he continued, "but I can move forward with you. We can visit. We can plan. We can make it work if you want to." Tears spilled freely now. Grace dropped to her knees in front of Lily. "I will never disappear on you," she said, "no matter how far I go." Lily wrapped her arms around Grace's neck. "I know. The decision wasn't perfect, but it was honest." They planned carefully. Dates circled on calendars. Video calls scheduled. Countdowns drawn in marker. Grace prepared to leave, not as someone running toward success, but as someone anchored by love. On her last night before the first long trip, they returned to the street where it all began. The streetlight still flickered. Ethan watched Grace as she looked around, eyes shining. "Funny how one small stop can change everything," she said. He nodded. "I didn't fix your bike that night." She smiled.
No.
"You fixed something in me." They didn't know what the years ahead would hold.
Distance would test them.
Time would stretch thin. But fear no longer led the way. Love did. And that was enough. The airport was quieter than Grace expected. No rushing crowd.
No dramatic goodbye.
Just soft announcements echoing above polished floors and the steady rhythm of rolling suitcases. Grace knelt in front of Lily, adjusting the strap of her backpack for the third time. "You already packed your letters?" Grace asked gently. Lily nodded. "One for every week." Grace smiled, eyes burning. "I'll read mine too." Ethan stood a few steps back, hands in his jacket pockets, watching them. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in fate. He believed in effort, in showing up, in fixing what was in front of you. And yet, standing there, he couldn't deny that something bigger had carried them to this moment. Grace rose and faced him. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," Ethan said. "But we're not running anymore." They held each other. Not tightly, not desperately, but with a steadiness earned through storms. When Grace finally turned toward the gate, she didn't look back in fear. She looked back in trust. The months apart were hard. There were nights when time zones clashed and calls were missed. Days when Lily cried quietly after school, missing Grace in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Moments when Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at an empty chair. But there were also letters, care packages, laughing video calls. Grace showing Lily the snow outside her temporary apartment. Ethan sending photos of science fair ribbons and burnt pancakes. Love stretched, but it didn't break. Years passed faster than any of them expected. Grace kept her promise. She came back, again and again. And then, one spring morning, she came back for good. No press release. No headlines. Just a woman stepping off a plane with tired eyes and a full heart. Ethan was there. Lily ran straight into Grace's arms, nearly knocking her over. "You're home," Lily said. Grace nodded through tears. "I'm home." Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became honest. They built a routine, shared responsibilities, quiet dinners, loud laughter. Grace took a smaller role in her company, one that left room for family. Ethan started teaching night classes, mentoring kids who reminded him of himself, tired, hopeful, unseen. One evening, years after that rainy night, Ethan fixed Lily's old bike in the driveway. The chain had slipped. Grace watched from the porch, the memory hitting her softly. "Funny," she said, walking over. "Some things really don't change." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag.
Yeah.
"But some things do." He stood, reached into his pocket, not with a ring, not with a speech, but with a folded piece of paper. "It's a lease," he said, "for the place next door. I thought, maybe we make this official. Not because we have to, but because we want to." Grace laughed through tears. "You're asking me to move next door?"
"For now," he said.
"Step by step." She nodded, heart full. Step by step. Lily cheered from the porch like it was the best news she'd ever heard. And in that moment, nothing about their life looked like a fairy tale. It looked better. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried pain, stayed kind, and chose love anyway. One simple click can be your way of saying, "I felt this." And maybe someone else reading your like will feel a little less alone tonight. Years later, Lily would grow up knowing this story by heart. Not the billionaire part, not the headlines, but the part where a tired man stopped in the rain to help a stranger and chose kindness when no one was watching. The part where love didn't arrive loud, but stayed long. And that would become her compass. Because the real wealth in this story was never money. It was time. It was forgiveness. It was choosing to stay human in a world that often forgets how. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.